Welcome to the Business Brains and the Bottom Line podcast, everybody. My name is Paul Delegre, your host, and my guest today is Jeff Greenfield, the CEO of Provalytics. Welcome to the show, Jeff.
Thanks for having me, Paul. I'm excited to be here today.
Yeah. So before we kind of dig into the AI attribution platform that you use, a couple of definitions. And then I want to get into your background and what led you to this point in your career. But what is an AI-driven attribution?
Well, what that means is, in order to understand that, I think we have to kind of pan the camera back a bit to really understand what attribution is.
Right.
And attribution, and it solves this big problem that marketers have had. And there's this old saying, which is half the money that I spend in marketing is wasted. The only problem is I don't know which half. And that's been a statement that's been around for many, many years. And that's the issue that's going on. And that statement actually came out when all there was TV, print, and radio.
Sure.
But now the idea behind it is that there's so many different places where you can spend dollars, and so many different places as a marketer where you actually have to spend dollars. And the problem is that trying to reconcile all this stuff and figure out what's working and what's not working, you can't do it anymore like on the back of a napkin. It's become a very complicated math problem because you can't just say this sale came from this place,
right?
Because you don't really know. So attribution refers to math and statistical methods to determine where sales or where leads are coming from. AI-driven is a new component to this. Because it used to be the way we figured out attribution was we collected every bit of data there was.
Yeah.
Used to track people all over the internet and figure it all out. But because of all the privacy concerns, can't do that anymore. So there's a lot of gaps in the data. But luckily, through the advent of AI and machine learning, we can use that to fill in the gaps the same way they're able to do it, using AI with gene splicing. So we're able to get to the correct or the best answer faster using supercomputers than we ever could before. So that's what AI-driven attribution is, solving that problem on which half is being wasted and telling marketers where to better deploy their dollars.
Okay, thank you for that definition, by the way, because that makes complete sense to me now, because I was reading through some of the info I had, and I still wasn't quite following. I kind of knew what it was, but okay, that makes sense. But so, Jeff, you got a long, distinguished career. How did you get into this? Like, what over the years, what formed your kind of strategy and getting into this business and got you to the point where you are today?
Well, it wasn't by any type of design, because I'm not a numbers guy. And to me, the concept of measurement and numbers is not very sexy at all. I'm a marketer by trade, and marketers, we're big creative people. So I kind of got into this by accident. It was like 2007. I ended up somehow or another buying media for one of the three large weight loss companies, publicly traded weight loss companies.
Okay.
And there was an issue that was brought to my attention right away, which was that for every single sale that was occurring, we had 5 different vendors who were claiming credit.
Oh, God.
And so we had this, what we call a deduplication problem, which today is still one of the biggest problem marketers have. Let's say you have 100 sales in a day, and you go along and you download all of your stats from all the different platforms, and it actually says you had 800 sales. And it's like, okay, well, someone's got to reconcile that. Otherwise, finance is going to freak out.
Right.
And so I looked for solutions to solve it, and there wasn't anything. And then there were other problems that were being presented to me as well. And at the time, I had a technology team that was working on building out a completely different solution. And I pulled off a couple of folks to say, I think we can build out something quickly that'll solve the problem for this one particular client.
Okay.
And we built it out, and it started working, and it enabled us to really scale the media for this weight loss client. And it was like 6 months later, and I was talking to a friend, and he says, what are you working on? And I'm like, well, we're doing media for this client, and we ran into this problem, and we ended up solving it. And He said, "You did what?" And I explained to him how we had solved this deduplication problem and trying to figure out who was actually driving the conversion, who was in the top of the funnel versus the bottom of the funnel. And he's like, "I think you solved one of the biggest problems that marketers have." And I was like, "Really?"
100%. 100%.
So
Yeah.
that kind of led me to shift that build over to, instead of just being for that one client, to enable it so that I could sign up other clients, and went around, and that became the early days of my first kind of entree into this business, a company called C3 Metrics, which grew into being one of the top enterprise multi-touch attribution companies. And I scaled that company up to about 65 employees and exited there right before the pandemic. So essentially I did 12 years in that business. Now that was a different business because back then we would collect every single bit of data. And when I exited, things were working fine. But when the pandemic came, all of a sudden the world had shifted because of privacy. We had all these walled gardens, all of these places where we couldn't get data. And I started to see the direction that things were going, that privacy was becoming number one. We couldn't track anymore. And I said, I theorized, I think we can do the same thing, but by using machine learning and AI to complete the picture.
Got it.
And started building out what then became Provalytics, which is where we are now.
Yeah. So before AI, did you have to manually kind of combine all this data?
Yeah,
different sources.
Yeah, before AI, what would happen is that we actually had tags that would go on the website, and they would automatically collect hundreds of billions of data points almost every single month.
Okay.
And then we would manually have imported in all of the cost data, because we're looking at both what was happened and what the cost was. And then from that, then we would have computer programs that would go and run analysis to get to the answer. So now, but you see, one of the most important things about AI and about machines and about math and measurement is that there's still things where humans have to be involved. Because when you think about it, you just can't say to AI, "Hey, does this data look right?"
Yeah.
Because maybe they don't know if the data looks wrong or not. And so there's still a lot of aspects where our team has to get involved, especially before the data actually gets put into the platform, to make sure it's in the right format so that then the AI can actually do its stuff, because it's expecting things in a certain way.
Sure, that makes sense.
Throw a mess of things, because otherwise you have to plan for it and program it. And what we find is that human beings, we are great at making massive mistakes. So when we get data from clients, and even getting directly from the platforms, Google and Meta, they mess up all the time. So having an experienced human who's used to looking at the trends that you see in the data is incredibly valuable. And in the early days at C3, my former company, we didn't have QA. And I quickly realized you need to have folks in there, just a watchful eye, checking things out and make sure things are good.
Yeah, very nice. So, I mean, I kind of a little bit involved in the marketing of the company I work for too, and that's a discussion we have all the time: is this campaign effective? And it's just hard to know. It's hard to get that data that this program that you ran generated this much revenue, and it's hard to tie those two together. Whether it be anything as simple as a company blog or the company newsletter or anything you send out, does that result in any sales? I don't know.
Well, I'll give you just to kind of dig into that a bit. I'll give you like a typical scenario for a B2B company.
Yeah.
Let's say you've got your blog, okay, and let's say you're advertising on Meta, okay, which is Facebook and Instagram.
Yeah.
And let's say you're also advertising on Google. So when someone types in your name, it shows up there. So let's say you've got like a video, like we're on a podcast right now. Let's say you guys decide to chop up part of this conversation and put it up as content up on Meta, and you guys run it as an ad. So, and you've got a very targeted list you're going after because you know what your ICP is, your ideal customer profile.
Yep.
And one of them happens to see it, but just kind of scrolls past it, because that's what folks do today is they're scrolling.
Yeah.
And then later on in the day, they're on Instagram and they happen to see it again. And now they watch it for a couple minutes. It's kind of piqued their interest. And they say,
Sure.
hey, I think I'm going to go maybe check that out a little bit. So then they go into work the next day. They forget about it. And they're in a conversation with a couple of their folks. And they say, hey, did you guys know about this and blah, blah, blah. And so one of their colleagues goes and Googles the name and clicks on the ad and downloads, let's say, a white paper, what we would call like a lead magnet
Sure, yep.
in the B2B days. And now you have a lead that's come into your system. It's marketing. It's an MQL. It looks pretty good. And at the end of the month, when you go to look at what you spent on ads and what worked, your marketing person is going to say, well, those Facebook ads, the Meta, the Facebook, and the Instagram ads, those did absolutely nothing. But Google is really killing it. But what they didn't realize, because it's not in the numbers, is that what actually drove and built the awareness
Sure.
was the ad on Facebook and Instagram.
Yeah.
The Google was the end result of that.
Yes.
So that makes things very, very difficult to figure out. And the reason for that is because most of marketing today is hyper-focused on the click. Because
Yes.
what we do is we go backwards from what we want. And what we want is like a lead in B2B. And we look and see what preceded that was a click. So then we measure our marketing effectiveness based upon clicks. But the reality is that how marketing actually works is we invest dollars to buy impressions, which are eyeballs.
Yes.
And the purpose of that is to build awareness. And when awareness is built enough in the B2B space, people will start talking about us to their colleagues. And then eventually people will walk into our store and that translates into clicks, and that leads to a lead and an MQL and so on and so forth. So what needs to happen for most marketing teams is we need to drop the click, step away from it, and spend time looking at how many impressions are in market, because then we can count things like our trade shows, we can count things like video views from podcasts,
Right.
all sorts of things.
Yeah, so all the questions you're answering were, well, all the answers you're giving me right now are some of the questions that I had, which is making sense to me now. Because I've always kind of thought marketing was a lot of this, putting your thumb up in the air and hoping for the best, right?
But it is for most people.
Yeah.
Although they like to say that it's very sophisticated in terms of what they're doing. There's a spreadsheet that they're using and there's some math that's involved. But the reality is that it is a lot of sticking your thumb up in the air and making your best guess. But the truth is, to be completely honest, no one really knows what drives people's decisions. We're using math and we're backfilling it and testing it to see how well the models are producing. But these are models. They're not actual, completely deterministic insights. But what I like to tell people and our prospective customers is that I'm not saying that our platform or any platform is going to light your marketing on fire and take you to the moon. But I will guarantee you that our approach and many of the other approaches out there is less wrong than what you're doing today.
I love that. Less wrong. That's an honest description though. I like that, because anyone who tells you 100% we can do this is lying.
Oh, 1,000%.
Yeah.
And that's the problem, is that people are looking, as human beings, we love to look for the panacea, the ultimate. We believe that there's
the silver bullet, right? The magic wand that if I do this, I'm going to increase sales 10,000%.
Right. And the truth is, whenever human beings are involved, and they are, in any type of sales process and marketing involves human beings, there is no silver bullet, because we are still mysteries. So the best we can do is create mathematical models that do a very good job at predicting outcomes, and then use those as guidance to help guide our decisions. We're not saying that you should follow it exactly to the letter.
Sure.
What we're saying is that you use it to help guide some of your decisions. And that's really the key, so that you can actually have a more methodical and statistically sound approach to the decision. Because when you do that, and when the numbers all add up, then you can actually go to finance and say, hey, I'd like to get a bigger budget for this type of thing. And I can prove that this worked, and it's in your dashboard, Mr. or Mrs. CFO.
Yeah.
And that's the key.
That's again, having sat in a number of marketing meetings over the years, I mean, that's really the key. That's the biggest debate I see is how much money are we going to throw at this campaign if we're never going to know what the results are? Like
Right.
we can't tie revenue to this campaign unless someone says to you, "Hey, I saw that ad or that campaign which drove me to do this." Unless someone tells you that, you're never going to know.
Right, but even when folks tell you, there's always these things when you buy something on a site at the end after you purchase, there's a questionnaire that says, "How did you hear about us?"
Yep.
And there's usually a pull down. Those things are about as reliable as witnesses in a police lineup.
Yeah.
They're just we're not good at our recall, and we're not really good about, because really what I want to know as a marketer is, if I could get into your brain, I would want to know, what was the ad that
Yeah.
actually made you say, yes, I'm going to buy that?
Yep.
Because that's what I want to know. And so as humans, we really don't know those answers.
Okay. So the example you said earlier. So a guy goes to Meta or Facebook or Instagram, whatever, and it finally drives him to Google to search it, and Google gets the credit for it. How do you gather that data on Meta and all the platforms that you are advertising on to tie that all together? Because that would be, if you can do that, that would be unbelievable.
Well, that's what we do. And it's a
Yeah.
great question. So realistically, for the customers that we work with, which are rather large and typically have a bunch of different separate agencies that they're working with, like they'll have an agency for search,
Yeah.
one for social, one for TV, one for print. And the way to look at it is that these agencies are like an extended family. And they all kind of battle each other, because I may be the TV person and I don't care that you're managing social, but what I want is I want your budget.
Yeah.
Okay. So we could essentially go right into Meta and automatically pull out all that data, but we don't do that. And there's a reason behind that, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to alter behavior. We're trying to change how people manage media, because like I said, our platform is going to be less wrong, but it's going to give a different answer than what people are used to. And so what that means is people have to do things differently. And in order for it all to work, all of those separate agencies, all the extended family, they all have to work together and alter their behavior. And in order for that to happen, we have to be in a relationship with them and they have to trust us. And that takes a while to build up that
Sure.
trust.
100%.
And so what we do is that instead of going behind their back and getting the data out of the platform directly, which we could do, we reach out to them on behalf of the client to get the data from them, because that then starts the relationship. So we start working together from day one as essentially as an extended family, or you could say as a dysfunctional family. And we come in as, we could say we're the counselor, or you could say that we come in as Switzerland, if you will, to be the coach, to kind of coach them along to get them to that next level.
Very nice. So I'm looking at my notes here from doing my background search on you, and one of the things you talk about is cookie collapse. Can you explain what that is and how you utilize that?
Yeah, so cookie collapse is a way to talk about all these privacy changes that have occurred. And kind of the best way to think about it is that if you remember a couple of years ago, there was that famous update on iOS, on your iPhone. It's called the ATT update. And it's called the App Tracking Transparency Update. I like to call it the AT&T update because I have AT&T.
Yep.
But essentially what happened is that it asked, when the iPhone's updated, it popped up every time you would go into an app. Like you'd go into Facebook and it says, do you want to give this app permission to track you? And it's like, no.
Yeah.
I mean, pretty much everyone said no.
Right.
What people didn't realize is before that update, they were tracking you. They didn't have to ask for permission. So there was this big movement where all of a sudden iPhone users had to give express permission for people to track them. When most people said no, what that did is that cut down the visibility and the ability to track people substantially. From that point forward, Facebook had pretty much no visibility into what was going on. So that was the first kind of thing that happened.
Okay.
The second thing that happened is that you have what we call in the marketing space walled gardens. A good example of that is Amazon. Amazon has all this data on pretty much every household in America. And if you're an advertiser there, you can buy ads. And I'm buying info and I'm targeting you specifically, but not you as a person. I don't know who you are.
Right.
But I can, if I'm a large enough advertiser, I can sync up my CRM with Amazon, and I can target my existing customers. Now, wouldn't that be great if I could combine that with also targeting my same customers on Walmart so I wouldn't overspend?
Yeah.
Well, guess what? I can do it at Walmart, but I can't combine them all together. So now I can't take my information from place to place. So that was another kind of cookie collapse. And the third cookie collapse was when Google Chrome said, we're going to get rid of the tracking cookies, which are known as a third-party cookie.
Sure. Yep.
Which is how all of advertising is based upon. And my God, the industry freaked out. So they said, we're not going to do it this year. And then the next year they said it's going to happen in a year. And then they said, we're going to do it. We promise we're going to do it. And then they said, no, it'll happen next year. And this went on for 3 to 4 years. And finally they said, we're not going to do it. But they said they're going to do an update. And what does that mean? I predict in the next 6 months to a year, Chrome is going to update and it'll pop up a message just like the iPhone that says, do you want to allow people to track you across different sites? And everyone's going to say no. And that will be the final nail in the coffin of the cookie. And then that collapses everything.
So where do you go from there? What happens if there's no cookies? Because I'm familiar with what cookies are and the value they have. So what do you do then?
Well, what that means is that since it's been going on and there's been warnings for a number of years, most companies in the advertising technology space have started to adapt and create other solutions. And that's where kind of AI has come in and has filled in that gap dramatically. For us, when we built out our solution, we kind of forecasted ahead. We saw the future was moving in this direction. So we don't utilize any user data whatsoever. We don't need cookies. We don't need them. In fact, we don't even have any technology that uses cookies.
Yeah.
So we're in great shape.
I was going to say, you're really positioned well going forward, because if they cut out cookies completely, it doesn't matter to you either way.
Yeah, we thought it was going to be all gone a year and a half ago, but it turns out cookies are still here. But the dirty little truth about cookies is that over the last couple of years, as people have been moving away from them in advertising technology, a lot of people have been saying, they really weren't as reliable as we once thought they were. Because no one really checked the validity of these things. So other methodologies are being used, and advertising is such a huge component of the free internet, if you will, although more and more of it we have to pay for.
Yeah.
But it's important enough that there's methodologies that folks are using that don't violate user privacy, that still provides for advertising revenue for publishers, for streaming platforms, but most importantly, respect user privacy.
Nice. So, you meet with customers, and I'm assuming you take a look at what their current platforms look like, what their marketing campaigns are, the different programs they're running. And I know the big thing, I can tell you what every company would ask would be, okay, if I go with you, how do we monetize? How do we gather the data to go say we were here before and now here we are? Could you have a way of putting that data together for the customer, say we've increased your business 10, 20, 30%, whatever the number is?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Paul. So what ends up happening is that when we start the onboarding process with a new customer, we look at all of their marketing, and what we like to collect is the last year's worth of data on a daily basis. And then we look at their different KPIs or the conversion events. What are they looking to measure? And we'll take the last year's worth of data.
Okay.
We'll run it through the platform, and then it will come out with essentially a report showing, hey, this is what's working and this stuff is not working at all. And then there's like a disparity, because the marketing team who brought us in, typically, they brought us in because things weren't working that well. But then when they see the degree of difference between what they're used to believing and what our system shows, it's somewhat unbelievable. Even though we
Yeah.
can prove it, it's still like this is too far-fetched. And so part of the first step of what we do in the change management process is work with the marketing team. And what we recommend, the first thing that we do is we find something that the platform says, we find the campaign and the platform says, this is a loser. You're way overspending on it. In fact, you could cut your spend 90% and it would not impact, let's say, leads.
Right.
And the marketing team is like, oh no.
They get pissed off. Yeah.
Yeah, they're like, there's no way we could cut that. That's just BS. So we say, well, how about if we cut it 10%? Oh, we would see it right away. How about 5%? It would take like 2 weeks, but we would see a decrease. And so then we say, okay,
Let's do it.
let's cut that 5% and let's meet back in 2 weeks and see what happens. And so we meet back in 2 weeks, and it's a head scratcher because we cut, that's the only thing we changed, and nothing changed. Leads are still flowing in, everything is still exactly the same. So it's like, okay, so maybe we overspent a bit. So now we have this extra money to spend, that 10% that we cut or 5%.
Yeah.
Let's put it someplace that the model says can handle more money that you say can't handle more. So all it takes is that little 5% moving around.
Yeah.
And then people start to realize, okay, well, maybe there's a different perspective. And what I like to look at this as like the typical car accident kind of, conundrum or scenario. When you think about a car accident and it's at a corner, if you got, people on every side, so there's 4 different perspectives of the car accident, the cops go and talk to one person, and they say, oh, this is what happened, blah, blah, blah. They go across the street. Totally different view.
Yeah.
Totally different perspective. 4 people, 4 different views of what's going on. So it's very important for us to remember as humans that we have a viewpoint, and it's so easy for us to believe that our viewpoint is the only way and that this is the right way, especially in corporate America where we've been doing things a certain way for a long time. And so this presents a different viewpoint. And for me, the most exciting thing is to work with the teams, because what ends up happening is that as they start to look through a different lens, they expand their viewpoint, expands their thinking about the possibilities for marketing. And that's where things start to get really exciting.
Yeah, you got to be delicate in those situations too. I'm assuming you don't want to tell them the baby's ugly, right?
Well, some
People
of the
gotta-
babies are really ugly, and
Yeah.
someone has to say it. But you're right about that, because what ends up happening is that some of that extended family, the people that are doing a very good job, or they think they're doing a very good job, they're actually not.
Yeah.
Someone's got to send them the bad news. And so we end up being that bearer of bad news. We try to be as delicate as possible with it, but someone's got to say, hey, we got to turn this ship, and we got to move out of the way of that iceberg. So everybody hold on. It's going to be a little bit of a shock to the system.
Sure.
But we're all working towards the greater good here.
Yeah. So, and I don't expect any numbers here, but how do you, what's your, how do I say it? The financial structure of how you price how you charge your customers, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, no, great question, Paul. It's a license fee based upon how much they're spending. So that way it's a percentage of their spend.
Okay.
And that way we make sure that the return on investment is always there. And it's applicable for marketers that are spending 10 million or more per year. Obviously, the more they're spending, if you're spending $100 million, the amount of return that you're going to get on your investment in Provalytics is going to be substantial.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a big spend.
It is, but you would be surprised. There's a lot of marketers that are spending north of $100 million a year. And when you're spending at those levels, there's a lot of details, and it's easy to get confused because at that level, you're spending across a multitude of different channels, many of which give you very little feedback in terms of any clue of their effectiveness. You just know in your heart that it's the right thing to do. We come in and provide a lot of certainty in terms of that.
Yeah, you validate what they're doing and not doing, right? I think that's the whole thing right there. Is if you can validate what you're doing with data doesn't lie.
That's absolutely right. Yeah,
Yeah.
1,000%.
What would be a profile, a typical profile of a company that you would go after? Like $1 billion and up, 500 million and up. What would be a good sweet spot for you? Your company. I know there's probably
Yeah.
other bigger
Yeah,
companies.
no,
But
we typically don't look at the size of the company. We typically look at, first off, what are they spending in terms of marketing? That's our
okay.
first indicators. How much are they spending across all of marketing? Number one. Number two, how diversified is their mix? If they're only spending $30 million a year on Facebook, which I don't know why they would, but let's say they are,
Yeah.
they're not, they're going to feel like they got it all handled. They don't need us. Okay. But we want a marketer who's spending north of 10 million or more per year, one that's spending in at least 5 different marketing channels.
Nice.
And then we look for sectors that are typically always on. So things like financial services, pharmaceutical, travel and hospitality, things like that, and
Yep.
the larger omni-channel retailers. That's
Nice.
who is our typical ICP.
Yeah, that nice. Those are obviously good markets, right?
Yeah, yeah, and they spend lots of money, and they have lots of problems in terms of figuring out how do you properly budget across all of the different places. How do we prove out that things like new emerging media, like podcast advertising and CTV, is actually working? And how do you put it all together so that it makes sense for finance, so you can actually justify and then even increase your budget?
Yeah, you said something a little while ago that it's kind of making sense to me now. You said if someone just has all their marketing budget in one platform, hard to gauge what it's doing. But if, like you just said it, if someone has 5 different platforms they're using, that makes your job a lot easier, I would think, right? Because now you can start tweak the numbers of all the different platforms. Am I getting this right?
No, you're absolutely right. Is that, you want to have a diversified marketing mix because people go to different places throughout their day, throughout their weeks. And
Yep.
depending upon who you're selling to, you need to be in lots of different places. If you're only one place, it makes it a lot harder to sell. Today, especially in the US, people go to everything. They scroll, they stream, they shop online and in store. So there's lots of different places you need to be.
Yeah, no. What's funny is I've often said I don't know if I'd want to be in the brick and mortar business anymore. About like having like a clothing store that's has a location, because I don't know about you, but I buy most of my stuff online. Like I don't even, because especially with like these online retailers, you can return it like that if it doesn't fit. They make it easy for you. So
There's
yeah.
still a lot of sales in the US. The vast majority still happen in brick and mortar. And I think as the pendulum swings one way towards people buying and doing everything online, we're always going to see it swing back, which is
Yeah.
where things get fascinating. So I think that we're seeing malls that are being shaped into different containers and different shapes
Sure.
and things. We're seeing the reemergence of certain downtowns in the US now.
Yes.
So I think there's the convenience of online, but there's also the exciting aspect of the curation that
Sure.
happens in boutiques and stores that younger people have never experienced.
Yeah.
I even think catalogs are going to come back now.
Wow.
Which is
Okay.
strange because that's something that you think about. People that are, let's say a 4-year-old has never experienced a catalog. To them, it would be very novel.
Yeah, it'd be
to
new.
us, we'd be like, what the hell is this?
That was something like the Sears and Roebuck catalog I got my family got when I was a kid, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's great. So Jeff, this has been great. I've really learned a lot, but you've really, I love your platform. I love what you do for companies, and best of luck.
Well, thank you so much, Paul. It's been a pleasure. Definitely.
If someone wanted to get in touch with you, Jeff, how would they do that?
The best way is to go to Provalytics.com. They can also just go to Get Prova. Prova actually is an Italian word that means proof, because that's what we're in the business of, is proving what we're doing is working.
Provade.
Provade. There you go. So
That's the infinitive.
GETPROVA.com. GetProva.com.
Sounds good. Well, Jeff, we'll kind of end it on that. No, I think we covered a lot of ground today. I think the folks out there hopefully found this interesting, because I know I did. Because marketing is always, to me, like I said, the kind of the guesswork. But if you can take the guesswork out, I think it sounds like you have a winner there. That's for sure.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Paul.
All right. Well, that's it for this edition of the Business Brains and the Bottom Line podcast. My name is Paul Delegro, signing off till next time.